Hi, Evelina. Happy New Year to everyone. I hope you've had a good break and festive period, whatever you've been celebrating.
So that's our first episode of this year, and we've decided that we'll do something a little bit different, and we'll make sure that we are actually scheduling topics in advance, and we want to kind of publish some of those discussions, conversations in advance. So you can choose which ones you want to participate, and maybe also you can send some of your questions in advance. So we will be doing that from next week. And for this session topic, I think we are at this time of the year where we are reflecting on, where we are on our journey, on our own growth and self-development, and making some of those New Year's resolutions. So instead of actually talking about goals and New Year's resolutions, we wanted to take a step deeper and dive into a topic of spirituality. So what do we expect to cover in this topic? So we look at what spirituality is. And Valentina, with her background in anthropological studies and spirituality, she will share a lot of information about the entire kind of evolution of spirituality in our society and what is our relationship, kind of a cultural relationship with spirituality and how that changed over time. We will also look at how that relates to the concept of mind and consciousness, and what are those different levels of awareness and self-awareness, and how all of this relates to well-being, health, and things like suffering. So please feel free to share any questions, any thoughts as we go through. And Valentina, I'll start with you and I'll ask you, what's the definition of spirituality? I think people are talking about this nearly as a contrast to religion, right? I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual. But what does it even mean? What does it mean to be spiritual? What is the definition of it?
So a lot of the issues that people have with the word spirituality is the fact that it's so broad and it can mean a lot. And you can have a spiritual relationship with religion, you can have a spiritual relationship with food. But what actually characterizes that? And so if we kind of think about I think religion can serve quite a useful purpose simply to understand how spirituality is a bit different from it. And how also that is different from, say, mental health and well-being. So when we kind of look back into the past and we think about spirituality, most of that has been colonized essentially by religion. And religion has sort of put doctrines and practices and principles to help us try and attain a feeling or a sense of spirituality. But underneath that is the actual feeling of spirituality or a feeling of spiritual connection. And what that actually feels like, and when I kind of did research into this from an anthropological perspective, is that you have elements there of transcendence, so feeling like you are extending yourself beyond yourself. So you're reaching out into the world somehow, or affecting others, affecting the world. And also sometimes that's you gain a sense of observing yourself in context of the world and the universe. There's also a real theme of internal life, so inner life, so connecting to what we often think of as like a sacred or a deeper core. So a lot of that sense of spirituality comes from our relationship with ourselves. There's also a real theme of interconnectedness. So the interconnectedness of all things, there being some kind of grand pattern, grand system that we are touching in on or trying to understand or trying to make sure that we have a beneficial relationship with and that we play our part within it. And there's various other themes as well, and I won't go into every single one, but I think a lot of those are the feelings that we talk about when we talk about a feeling of or a spiritual experience or the experience of spirituality. And a lot of religious practices and religious doctrines, so things like prayer and prayer in different forms. So often repetition comes into prayer. And those are the kinds of things that can give us a sense of like a soothing sense, and it can allow our mind to wander into a state of flow. So often also the state of flow is aligned with a feeling of spirituality, and especially people who work in creative industries and are creatives in their spare time even as well, will liken that feeling of flow in their creative self-expression. So that's sort of, again, transcending the self by expressing the self, with a feeling of spirituality. And so a lot of, like I said, a lot of religious practices, so things like chanting, singing together, and that connectedness with others, creating a sound together, being part of a wider community, and that interconnectedness, group worship, prayer, sort of personal prayer as well, so having that conversation with the self and that conversation with a wider context and a wider pattern. These are practices that have developed because they help us connect with that feeling or those feelings that comprise spirituality. And now, kind of going on from that a little bit to the role that spirituality now plays in our lives. So you mentioned this group. I mean, a lot of people identify as spiritual but not religious, and there's actually a really fantastic book that explains the cultural development of that term really well, called Spiritual but Not Religious. And that comes from, so there's sort of two sides to that, is that there's a real willful disconnection of spirituality from religion, and wanting to identify not with the doctrines and not with things that are explicit in terms of presupposing practices and principles, but having a personal, individualized relationship with those spiritual practices, a kind of what we often think of as like a pick and mix of spirituality.
Going on that kind of self-discovery journey on your own terms instead of kind of having a religious guide, right?
Exactly. But that is a lot of that. So with Eastern religions, a lot of that came from colonialism, and essentially the West kind of brought back these wisdoms, but in a way that was very reductionist and really separated from the cultural context in which they developed. So I would really encourage anyone who is exploring religious practices that kind of originate in other countries to really look into the context and in which they arose, to understand their meaning fully.
Meaning and origins of it, like for what purpose some of
Exactly.
those practices have been created, and what is the meaning of those. And what was interesting for me, actually, that I've kind of looked at, I was reading this book called Human Givens by Joey Griffin and Ivan Tyrrell, and their approach is very much about kind of inherent human needs that we all have, and as a child is born with this kind of a blueprint that we are pre-programmed to express ourselves in a specific way in the world, and then we have those kind of internal maps, and we are constantly matching them with our environment and updating it with some of those templates. We are now filling them with content and kind of changing them and evolving them. And from that perspective, what their definition of spirituality was that it's actually what spirituality really is from the society's point of view is an attempt to improve your sensory connection with yourself and with the environment, right? So how deeply you are connected with yourself, how deeply you are connected with the environment, but it's not necessarily just a connection, it's the level of our ability to read that, right? So how deeply we are tuned in to other people, to different levels of awareness, right? And people talk about different levels of consciousness, for example, right? How deeply you are aware of yourself, right? How well do you know yourself, and the levels of self-awareness. And when we talk even from about self-awareness from mental health point of view, we know that it's very, very closely linked to specific illnesses, because the more unwell you are, the less you are self-aware, to the point that if you take, let's say, extreme schizophrenia, person who has paranoia, for example, and has, their own image of the world. Now they are completely lack that level of self-awareness between, what is, what kind of part of my identity is real and what isn't, and what is that illness. So if you take it from that perspective, then really spirituality is nothing else than improving those processes, which means that also we are improving our health and well-being through doing that, because we learn mental, physical, emotional processes when we are able to tune into that. And when we are able to read that, we are able to then do something about this, right? Which translates into better self-awareness, into better connections and relationships with other people, into, even let's say better relationship with things like food and, what does our body really need? So, yeah. So what's your definition, from kind of, when you're looking, what are your thoughts on that kind of definition? Because this includes physical side of things, right? It includes like sensory experience, right?
Yeah.
When you look at meditation and people say that I learn how to feel my own heart rhythm and reduce my blood pressure.
Mhm.
Now that from this kind of definition, then that would also include that journey, like learning how to regulate your own kind of biological impulses and and
Mm,
physical needs, and it's not just what's in your mind, it's also the physical sensory experiences that we're including in it, which I think is very closely linked to some of those,
yeah.
experiences, spiritual experiences that people have.
Definitely. So a lot of what we think of now as part of our understanding of consciousness, in terms of in a mental health context and thinking about is through the lens of mindfulness. And obviously mindfulness is a concept and a practice
Mm.
originated in Buddhism. It has been colonized and secularized and brought into sort of Western scientific gaze
Yeah.
mental health system, which does change that, the meaning of it. So I do want to acknowledge that those things are separate.
Yeah.
But so that comes from, a practice which is cultivating this relationship with the self. So there's those two elements. There is that internal life and then that connection. So connectedness with the self, connectedness with others, and with a grand scheme and a bigger picture. And allows us with those things, that allows us to see ourselves in context and to step outside. Again, that's that transcendent step outside of ourselves and observe. And I think that's playing a really important part, and a big reason why it's become sort of, or it's been taken up by a scientific mental health system,
Mm.
because it has such obvious, clear benefits to people and how we operate in our well-being. And so with the practice of meditation is, for anyone who hasn't practiced it or kind of wants to learn a bit more, just in summary, is that what it does is it trains you not to, the goal shouldn't be to influence or change, because we want to get away from this idea of I should be like this, I want to be like this. We're often told that we are supposed to be another way and we should always be striving to be another way. And that's actually really not what mindfulness is
Yeah.
about, even though, having more control over yourself and being able to self-regulate a bit more is a byproduct of it. But it's about creating a space so that you're not immediately in the emotion and in the experience to the point where you can't see yourself experiencing
So you
it.
can
So
feel the emotion but not become it, right? And it's just
exactly.
like this whole kind of concept of improving our health and well-being through control. If you want to control it, you won't be able to, to grasp it, right? It's kind of this concept of stepping away in order to create the gap and the space, so that from nervous system point of view, when you look at kind of the brain responses point of view, it's not an automatic response. You're actually training the nervous system to pause and include the conscious rational decision about the action instead of just kind of going onto that roller coaster that as soon as the trigger happen, or whatever the circumstance is, that takes you on a specific kind of automatic impulsive response. So it's that kind of
Absolutely.
gap rather than a control.
Yeah. Totally. It's the gap. So it's the ability, and it's within that gap that you then have choices about how you're going to engage and how you're going to connect with it, or what you want your response to that experience to be.
So let me just kind of say that once again, because I think what you said here is really, really powerful, right? So it's the power of choice lies in the gap between the trigger and response.
Yeah.
Right? If we don't have that gap, that response is always automatic, impulsive, irrational, overly emotional, right? Like how many of us acted in anger, in fear, in whatever, and then looked back and regretted it, think like, why did I say that? Why did I do this? What was it that kind of guided my actions? So if we don't create that gap, most of the time we regret our actions later.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's really important to remember. And especially, it's the size of that gap is something that I think a lot of people are working on. So, or when you start working, doing personal work, self-development work, or you start therapy or some other kind of coaching intervention, often you're working on the size of that gap. So we never want to be that far away from the feeling, of our emotions, or that disconnected from our emotional or our internal state, because we still need to be able to hear it so that we know what our needs are, and so that we know how to satisfy them, and also just to empathize, engage with the world in a way that feels fulfilling. But we don't want that gap to be too small, because then we don't have much wiggle room with our own reactions and our own behaviors in response to it, because then that means that we often we lose a sense of control, but also we lose, exactly like you were saying, that self-awareness, because we can't see ourselves. It's, think about it really in practice. If you're looking at something right here, you can't see it. But if it's really, really far away, you also can't see it. So you want it to be at that optimum distance, whereby you can see it, you can feel it, you can touch it, but you're not completely controlled by it. And that's where practices like meditation and mindfulness can really help find that optimum gap for
this is a great concept when even we are thinking about motivation and action and goals, right? Because if like you say, that gap is too far, that means we have no feeling and therefore no energy and no emotion to fuel our actions. So we are not motivated, we are not driven to take action to achieve, right? We want something, but there is no energy that fuels us to take specific action. And very often this is, very big sign of depression, where you know what's right, you know what you should be doing, but your body just has no internal resources, cognitive resources, emotional resources to actually execute any of that. And there is no motivation for you to take those steps. So when that gap is too far, then that's exactly what it is, when our emotional drives are completely disconnected from what is good for us and what we want, and the actions that we would like to create in the future. And when it's too close, then we are just emotional wrecks. We are the emotion, and then emotion is controlling us instead of us having any way of responding from it in a right way. Right. So I'd love to ask as well, if for anyone who's listening, what is your definition of spirituality, right? And when we're talking about, what is spirituality, what is your definition? What does it mean to you? Because I think it's a very personal thing. And for some people, spirituality is their daily walk in a nature. For some other people, spirituality is meditation practice. For some other people, it's I don't know, some sexual encounters, right? And going on some sort of yoga kundalini journey or whatever that is also spiritual practice, right? So I'd love to hear some comments. See, like, what is spirituality? What does it mean for you? And what is your practice? How do you relate to that? I'd love to hear that. And yeah, what is your spiritual practice, Valentina? Like,
Yeah.
what does spirituality means to you personally? Because you've done a lot of research about this, right? But what about you personally?
So I think for me personally, there's sort of things that have arisen that I've encountered just organically and have a spiritual relationship with. And then there's other spiritual practices that I've engaged with on purpose because they're spiritual practices. And so organically, a relationship with food whereby it's a space in my day where I'm extremely mindful, cooking and food, where I'm sort of engaging not just with the creativity of making something, but that is one element of it that's sort of enables that flow. But then there's also the engaging with something tangible, something of the earth, that gives me that connectedness to not just the ground and the earth beneath me, but to the globe, especially considering how far a lot of our food travels to get to us. And also that the relationship with the self, so nourishing yourself and having that reciprocal relationship with the world where you're both taking and giving. But in terms of kind of more intentional practices, I do like to do a lot of yoga, and that's and also a bit of meditation as well. So yoga really helps develop. There's a lot of, I think, again, a lot of the way we practice yoga in the West is very removed from.
It's modernized, and it's actually so
Yeah,
far from the philosophy of health, actually, right? When you look
yeah,
at what yoga is, it's a philosophy of healthy body and healthy mind, and it's not something that is just sequence of aerobic exercises in a posture of asanas, right?
exactly. And there's a lot there to be learned in terms of, the things that we struggle with and the things that we find hard to release control over in a bodily practice are often the same things that we find hard to release control over in our daily lives. And we can draw a lot of parallels there, gain that self-awareness from that. We can notice where we're holding what we, where we might hold our breath, where our breath flows more easily, and how we feel when we open certain parts of our body and close certain parts of our bodies. But also there's a huge amount of mythology around yoga that is, not necessarily so involved in the way we are relating to our physical body in the practice, but that draws on symbols and stories, ancient stories that have significance far outside of the practice of yoga, that talk about dualities of emotion and experience. And a big one that comes up in yoga a lot of the time is this marrying, and I think this is one that's also translated into the kind of westernized exercisey type version of yoga we often do, and that's about marrying effort and ease. But I think that that's something that we can connect with very easily. We can understand those concepts without having to
Some nice
understand a lot
concepts, yeah.
about, and we can understand it without having to go, know a lot about the mythology or the history of yoga. And that simply is wanting to keep that balance where you're putting in effort, you're creating force, you're creating energy, and then you're also having you're releasing control. You want a sense of ease and a sense of relaxation and submitting. So there's various dualities that come up from that. There's dominance, submission.
And even if you think from the nervous system point of view, right, it's a right balance between your sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system, because sympathetic nervous system is this kind of, go and this kind of impulse and drive and this kind of stress response and action and fight and flight, while parasympathetic is kind of rest, digest, recuperate, release. So, we need healthy balance of both in order to be healthy, to be able to kind of take action, to take some motivation, but not burn out, right? And do it in a right way. So definitely there's so many different aspects that we can look from kind of mental, cognitive, emotional, and physical point of view. And for me, when I think about spirituality, for me, it's about connection. And, to me, I think we live in a very disconnected world. And I really believe that a lot of our mental health issues even, and a lot of societal problems that we have in this world are created as a result of the gap between the way we as human beings have evolved to operate and the way we live today in the modern society. And as a result, we end up disconnected from ourselves first, from our goals and future and intentions, from our past, from other people, from nature. There is this kind of disconnect between our mind and body, right? We are kind of over putting too much importance on kind of like cognition and knowledge and material goods, instead of a lot of those kind of wisdom, like inner wisdom, right? Like internally we know what's right for us, and yet how many of us really do this? So I think there's this kind of disconnect, and for me spirituality is that journey of connecting back to the source, to our own needs, to ourselves, to other people, to nature. And I think that's where you kind of feel most alive and most kind of connected with your own purpose, and why am I even here, when you find those threads of connection in those different places. So I think that's kind of my my definition of it. And of course there are then some practices that you can do, like what do you do to increase that connection with yourself, with others. And yeah, I do yoga in the morning. I do like meditating. I love being in nature, but also the way we connect with other people as well. It's very interesting. And I think my kind of biggest learnings in self-growth were through relationships and through other people, and looking at I think very often people are blaming others for how we feel. Like, you made me angry, you did this and you did that, and I act like this because of your action. But actually, if we really take a step back and really connect, like, what is it about this specific action, this specific trigger, that resulted in this action landing on me in this specific way? Now you can go on an entire spiritual journey of reflection to see, like, what is it about the situation that what is it teaching about me? What does it tell me about my values, about my insecurities, about my map of the world, and how do I respond to the environment? Because I might say something to 3 people in the room. One person will get angry, another person will be indifferent, and a third one will be crying in a corner of the room, right? But I said exactly the same thing. So it will land on people in a very different ways, and we forget that, right? We are kind of putting responsibility and blame on others, instead of actually going on this inner journey and reflecting on our own growth. And what do I know? What's my levels of kind of awareness, understanding? What are my sensations? And, how am I reacting in response to all of this?
Certainly. And I think that's where a lot of the benefit comes from, the way people do practice spirituality in our Western context, is through this sort of relationship with the self. So it's a very personal thing. I mean, obviously there's still lots of places to group worship, and in the more traditional and kind of established religions, but for a lot of people it's a very personal thing, and it really helps connect with the self and understand the self. And that's where practices like journaling that have we see them as mental health and well-being practices, but they're also founded in a lot of these ideas of having a relationship with the self and having a strong inner life, having a strong internal relationship. And that again allows that space, because it allows you to, simply by externalizing something, we are taking it out of the domain of thought and putting it into the domain of language, and by translating it we put a gap in place. So practices like journaling can be really useful if you're kind of thinking about wanting to cultivate that. I mean, meditation is a very useful one. It took me a little while to get onto meditation, I won't lie. And I used to think, oh, it's fine, because I run a lot and that feels spiritual, and I have a space there where I'm not doing other things, and yoga. But meditation, the practice of noticing your own thoughts, that being that specific part of it. Lots of things can be meditative in terms of the fact they bring us into the moment and they help us gain a sense of calm and an awareness of ourselves. But the actual practice of learning to notice our own thoughts, that I think is really useful to do, even if it's just like 2 minutes. And it's a nice way to fall asleep. 2 minutes.
So, Valentina, what are, I think, for a lot of people who are maybe listening and maybe haven't kind of bought into the spirituality, right? What are the real tangible benefits of going on the spiritual journey? Because I think we can understand the concept of it, of, meaning, purpose, and connection, but these are not something that you can touch, right? That has kind of physical, measurable outcomes, right? It's something that we feel, and like usually some of those spiritual experiences is more of a, it's not something tangible, right? However, we both know that those spiritual practices has huge benefits for our health, for our well-being, for our improved relationships, the way we respond to the world. So what are some of those kind of more tangible, measurable benefits that would make it worth it to engage in those practices?
So I think one that comes up quite a lot when I'm working with people one-on-one is a sense of groundedness. So I think it's very easy to feel ungrounded in our world. We're often drawn outside of ourselves and we can feel quite unstable, especially, in the current political, socioeconomic climate, and environmental as well. And so a sense of groundedness, and what that comes from is connecting to the self and to principles that are ubiquitous, that these principles do not change. The fact that you have thoughts, that's not going to change. The fact that you exist, the fact that there are these dualities of life and experience, those things don't change. And you can always come back to them no matter the circumstance and no matter the emotion even that you're feeling and what's going on. So practicing spirituality and gaining an awareness of these different things, these different grounding anchors, can give you a real sense of stability internally, and also developing that relationship with yourself, whereby you're connected with yourself to the point where you can understand and feel your emotions, but you also have a gap between feeling them and responding to them. That allows us to make better decisions. So often, we might look back in the past and you might think, oh, I don't know why I did that. Like I wasn't thinking, or, I thought it was the right decision at the time, but it wasn't actually what I needed. And a lot of the time that comes from, it's where we're making decisions from this cognitive space of thinking and weighing up different sides of an argument, pros and cons, based on, logistics and science and what we think we should do. And actually, most of the time when we want to make a decision that's going to feel right, that's going to actually reward us and benefit us, it's going to be because we're connecting to our deeper needs, and the decision will be fulfilling those needs. And we're only going to be able to do that if we find that optimum distance whereby we can see and understand our needs, our feelings, our emotions, and we can also choose how to respond to them. So it will make for better decision making. And that's not just in our personal lives, that can be in business as well, because you can.
This is so powerful, right? Because I think, it's so easy to say that, I have this problem of, leading quite superficial life, or, in a coaching practice, as we see, a lot of our clients come to us, they say, I don't feel grounded. I don't feel like I belong. I don't feel like I have purpose in my life. I don't feel like I'm leading a life that will get me to a place where I can then look back and have no regrets, right? So people feel like they are not on their own path because they're so disconnected from this kind of inner intuition and this kind of level of self-awareness about what is right for me, but also what is right for the world, what is right for other people around me, and being able to read those intentions of others, because our connection with others is only ever going to be as good as our connection with ourselves. right?
Mm.
So if we don't have that level of self-awareness, and if we don't know how to regulate our own thoughts, intentions, how to connect with ourselves, we will never be able to truly hear and listen and kind of hold other person in a moment of distress, or where they really need us. So
Mm.
there is a lot of those practices that translate into improved relationships, into better decisions, into more meaningful, purposeful lives. And as we are more aligned with our intentions, that translates into different level of success, right? Because people are able to achieve very different results in their businesses, in their careers, when they are driven by this kind of energy of, I'm on my own path, I'm doing what I love, I like what I'm doing. And it's very interesting as well of I love these concepts of kind of mind and consciousness, in a way how it's related in a book by William Hart, The Art of Living. And he talks about those concepts of kind of matter and mind, right? So matter is kind of the ongoing process of becoming, kind of the consistent interaction of physical matter, of how we are kind of becoming ourselves in that world, process of kind of appearing, disappearing, and always kind of duality of becoming all the time. But then mind is separated into like 4 different layers. And first is awareness. So it's kind of before you can do anything, you need to be aware of it, right? So awareness is this kind of conscious and subconscious input of information. Then you have the second level, which is understanding. So now you need to recognize what it is, right? So you're recognizing that the knowledge, and there comes your interpretation of this. What is it? What is this that I'm feeling? What is it that I'm seeing? What is it exactly that's happening? And you are also here at that level of understanding. There are some labels and judgment that are included in that, because now this is not what just is, this is our interpretation of what is. And
Mm.
then we are adding a third level, which is a sensory experience of it all. So sensations, and how we are feeling about this. What's our pain and pleasure about this, and what are our emotions about this. And very often this kind of pain and suffering comes from our own incorrect interpretation of what is, not of what it is per se, but our relationship to it, right?
Mm.
Which then leads to the fourth level, which is our reaction to it. So our action and response will be either towards something or away from something. And it will depend on these maps of the world that we have created, and, how we have um, interpreted, and as a result of that, what action we are taking in response. So there are these kind of levels of kind of Vijnana, Sana, Vedana, and Sankara, right? So it's kind of awareness, understanding, sensations, and reactions. And I really love that, because if we, even if you take that as a concept, you can apply that in therapy sessions, in a coaching sessions, to try to understand, like, what is the reality, right? What is real and what is only our interpretation of it? What are we feeling as a result of that, and what are our actions? Which is, again, it's very similar when you look at CBT concepts, right? When you look at feelings, actions, emotions, and physical sensations, right?
Mm.
So this kind of goes a little bit more deeper, but it's the same kind of, the other side of the same coin. So yeah, Paul has commented here saying that spirituality, it's my faith to giving me a sense of purpose. Spirituality has helped me to have a love for myself and others, and my glass is typically half full, because I believe there is always a reason for any situation I am faced with. And it has significantly increased my EQ and connection when dealing with others. Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing. And I think definitely it's really, really great to see of how those kind of spiritual experiences can help us to see the world, as a glass half full, because you have belief and faith in some of those things that are invisible, that are not tangible, and it gives us better awareness of addressing some of those real life challenges when we have this outlook on life in that way. So thank you for sharing, Paul.
Yeah, certainly. And I think that's also, that's an important point, because it's having that sense of purpose. A lot of that comes from knowing or being able to give meaning to our actions and our experiences. And so much of that comes from our relationship with ourselves and our relationship to the world, and what we feel is a good existence, or the values that we want to live by, or even just our understanding of our place within the world, and within the universe, within existence, however you want to kind of conceptualize that. And so really, again, if we're thinking about the benefits of a spiritual practice, a lot of that is being able to imbue things with meaning. And that's, I have this sort of crisis of meaning sometimes, where nobody knows what something means, and we're also in such a sea of subjective meaning that it can feel really difficult to grab onto one and decide, no, this is what it means for me.
Yeah.
And so I think that's, having a spiritual practice really allows you to understand the world and through a gaze that is meaningful for you, and that then imbues your actions and your experiences with purpose.
And that's not only the concept of kind of spirituality and a cognitive concept, but you, for example, mentioned food, right? So our relationship with the world involves action, how we are exercising, how well we are eating, how well we are treating others, how well we are treating ourselves. So it directly translates into a lot of those actions that will then lead to our increased sense of well-being, but also physical health. Because if you have a good understanding of what is the right thing for me to do, what is the right thing for me to eat, how do I have the right level of motivation to execute on my goals and visions, and what is the purpose that it's driving me to take the action that will lead me to have that life with no regrets. Right? It's all of these beautiful things that can arise from that. So I think definitely spirituality can be, this kind of concept that is a little bit of wishy-washy in some ways. And hopefully, this discussion and this session increased a bit more of awareness about some of these kind of practical benefits about, what it is and what does it really even mean to go into that spiritual journey. And we'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on, what are your spiritual practices, and maybe there is something new that you are going to do this year, and anything that you can take away from some of those different levels of kind of awareness, understanding, and what is the concept of self-improvement, and how we can use this, how we can use the spirituality to improve ourselves and our life and have a better year.
Yeah, certainly. Yeah, indeed. I hope that this has helped kind of clarify some of those ambiguous parts of spirituality, and given something a little bit more tangible to something that can feel very abstract and very subjective. And yeah, hopefully it's kind of given anyone a little nudge to try and practice and see whether they can bring it into their own lives.
Right. Well, thank you, Valentina. It's been really, really fascinating discussion. I've enjoyed this. It's probably one of the longest sessions we had, but I'm sure we could continue talking on this forever. It's really, really interesting. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the next one. Bye, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you. Goodbye.